She started falling asleep before me. Before, we used to talk. Now silence and her back. I only began to notice it when it became impossible not to. At first, little things. She ate slowly as if she were chewing thoughts, not food. The spoon would freeze in her hand, her gaze lost in space. Sometimes when I told her something about work, she nodded out of sync with my words. Then, the bedroom light started going off before I even came in. I thought she was just tired. It happens, a hard day, heavy eyelids. But once I came in and heard her quickly turn to face the wall like she was hiding, the blanket pulled up to her chin. Her shoulders tense as if expecting a blow. I lay down next to her quietly, stared at the ceiling. She at the wall. "Are you asleep?" I asked. She didn't answer. After a couple of minutes, I reached out and touched her shoulder. She flinched. Sharply. As if I were a stranger. "Got cold," she exhaled, not turning around. But I felt it wasn't the cold. It was the wall she was building. In the morning I noticed, her hairbrush was lying too neatly like it hadn't been touched. But I knew it had been. There were hairs in it, long, light brown. Hers. But why was she putting everything in perfect order now? She'd never been a neat freak. There used to be a gentle chaos in the bathroom. My favorite kind of mess. Traces of life. Her perfume bottle almost empty. The same one she wore on our first dates. The scent was like an alarm, vanilla with a hint of something bitter, almost like a goodbye. But I hadn't smelled it on her in weeks. Not even on her pillow. I started noticing other details. Her phone. It used to lie around anywhere, in the kitchen, hallway, bathroom. Now it's always with her. She keeps it face down even when she's doing the dishes. Sometimes she takes it with her to the bathroom. Sleep became her refuge. Or her mask. I didn't know where tiredness ended and lies began. One night I woke up and realized she no longer breathes in sync with me. We used to fall asleep almost at the same time, like to the same rhythm. Now she either falls asleep too early or lies there with her eyes closed, pretending. Sometimes I think I hear her sighs, not deep or relaxed, but quiet, restrained. As if she's afraid. Or ashamed. Or maybe just indifferent. Something was changing. I could feel it. But I didn't know what exactly. I only knew this, her back used to be my home while she slept. Now it's a wall. There were no new things around. Not a single item from recent days. Then I noticed the shopping bags disappeared before they even reached the kitchen. As if things were appearing out of nowhere. New, but already hidden. She came home empty-handed. No receipts. No boxes. No explanations. I wasn't spying. I just started looking more closely. As if my eyes were drawn, on their own, to whatever stood out. The phone. Always with her. Even in the shower. Even for a 5-minute coffee run. But that evening, she left it on the shelf in the hallway. I walked by barefoot. The screen lit up. New message. No name. No number. No initials. Just a gray notification, faceless. I stopped. Stood there, staring at the screen like it was a fogged-up window with someone breathing on the other side. Then it went dark. I didn't touch it. But something clicked in my mind, quietly, precisely, like scissors snipping a thread. Seconds later, her footsteps. I looked away. "Everything okay?" she asked. Too casually. Too evenly. I nodded. We didn't really fight. But we became polite. Sterile, like an office kitchen. She asked how my day was. I said, fine. She said, good. And went to wash an apple. We became convenient. As if someone had laid a thin, sticky film between us, like the wrapper of something expensive but unnecessary. We used to have a habit touching feet before sleep. Even just with our pinky toes when we didn't feel like talking. Now nothing. I found a hair on the pillow. Black. Short. Maybe hers. Maybe not. I didn't remove it. I just lay there and stared at it like a little mark someone had left in a hurry. In the bathroom, I opened the drawer, the one where she keeps her tweezers. There was a coin in it. A small one. 10 kopecks. Why was it there? And why am I remembering all this? I wasn't looking for evidence. But it started sticking to me like dust to a wet palm. Jake has this habit placing his shoes sideways, toes toward the wall. And suddenly, those exact marks appeared in our home. It was one of those days when you just want to go home. No reason. Just home. I came back an hour early. No call. No warning. I just opened the door. And froze. By the wall, neatly aligned, stood a pair of shoes. Not mine. New. Barely worn. Toes facing the wall. Exactly the way Jake always placed his. I felt it before I understood it. My body knew before my mind did. My heart tightened, not with fear. With recognition. Jake had this odd habit since childhood, placing his shoes like he was embarrassed by them, like they too needed to stay out of the way. I remember our mom laughing. "Jake, did you give them orders or what?" Now his silent orders were in my hallway. But I didn't say a word. Didn't make a sound. I slowly took off my coat. Hung it on the hook. I listened. The house was quieter than usual. But not empty. The silence was taut. Like before a storm. Or just after. From the bedroom came the scent of her perfume. But it was overdone. Too sharp, too sweet, too masking. I took a few steps forward. I felt something foreign trembling in the air. Not physically, energetically. As if I had stepped into a scene where I had no role. And then she came out of the bathroom. In a robe. Wet hair. Droplets on her neck. She smiled. "You're early," she said, as if nothing had happened. As if everything was going according to script. But it wasn't my script. I nodded. Didn't smile. The silence between us was brief but sharp, like a slap on water. The splash inside. She walked past me. Lightly. As if no one had been hiding in the bedroom just moments before. As if those shoes didn't carry a memory that had known me since I was 7. And when she turned the corner, heading to the kitchen, I stepped toward the door. That door. And quietly, very quietly, turned the lock. Click. Almost inaudible. Everything seemed normal. Probably just something I made up because I didn't want to believe the truth. In the kitchen was my brother. He was in town and dropped by to visit. Everything was ordinary. But when I looked at us, I felt afraid. Not because she had lied. But because I no longer knew who I was. The office was white. Not sterile, intentionally so. As if someone wanted to convince us that nothing would hurt here. We sat side by side. Too close for two people who had emptiness between their fingers. She held my hand. But her fingers were like icicles. Not from fear. From disconnection. The doctor spoke about percentages, cycles, hormones. All I heard was a dull sound like underwater. As if it wasn't about us. As if we no longer existed. I looked at Sarah. She nodded. Confidently. Too confidently. As if it had already happened and she was just retelling the story. I tried to find pain in her. Or hope. Something alive. But all I found was a mask. Smooth, calm, decided. And in that moment, it wasn't suspicion that pierced me, it was horror. What if she's still the same and I'm not? That evening, she said it quietly, like commenting on the weather. Maybe we just let go? If it happens, it happens. I nodded. Like a captain quietly listening as his ship changes course without an order. But a week later, back to the pharmacy. Folic acid. Omega-3. Basal temperature. New charts on her phone. Color-coded marks on the calendar. And all of it without me. As if the role of partner had passed to someone else. Not in body, in intention. I watched her mark off the date on the magnetic board. Yesterday. Today. Tomorrow. Each day like a step sideways into a place where I no longer existed. She used to ask, "How are you?" Now she just handed me the jar of vitamins and said, "Here." I took it. Swallowed. Didn't even look. Not because I believed. But because that's what people do when they don't want to get in the way. Then I went to the bathroom. Looked in the mirror. And for the first time didn't recognize the eyes staring back. I had become polite. A passenger in a story someone else was telling in my voice. And the scariest part, I no longer wanted to interrupt. I caught their glance. Not a touch, a glance. And it was enough. Mary hosted a lunch like old times. No occasion, just because. Everyone was supposed to arrive by 2. But Jake was already sitting in the kitchen when we walked in. His voice was calm, confident. He was telling Sarah something about a boat, fishing, a lake. They were laughing. Her voice, higher than usual, a bit tense. When I appeared in the doorway, she went quiet. He didn't. He just turned and said, "Hey," then looked at her. And in that look, there was silence. A second, maybe 2. But too much in that second. Her eyes darted away. Sharp. Like she'd been burned. I stopped. Not physically, inside. As if something in me turned to glass. And in that glass, the first crack appeared. They started talking about trivial things. What they'd eaten, where they'd been, traffic on the highway. And I watched. Not their faces, their movements. How she didn't meet his eyes. How he laughed just a bit too loudly. He was telling a story about the trip to the lake. With enthusiasm. As if he was sharing a memory. And suddenly a scent. Not real. Faint. I remembered, 2 weeks ago, I got into his car. Just by chance. I needed a ride to Mary's. And in the air, there was the smell of her shampoo. The one with lavender and something else warm like home. I had asked, "Did you give Sarah a ride?" He said, "Yeah. She left her bag." Sarah said she just got off at the wrong stop and he picked her up. I believed them. No, I wanted to believe. And now, at the table, I heard Jake talking about the lake's landscape. How the water was like glass. How the silence was almost heavy. And I saw his hands rested on the table, relaxed. Like he owned the place. And in his voice was an ease. The kind of ease that belongs to someone who knows you're not going to say anything. And I didn't. I just watched. And felt something sharp grow inside my silence. I wasn't looking for proof. But I found a letter. And it was worse than a photo. Worse than a scene. It was a plea. I was looking for the insurance form. Just a piece of paper. Top drawer. Where we kept all the documents. Receipts, warranties, little necessities. I knew where she usually hid important things. I knew everything. Or thought I did. But under the passport cover, between the papers, was an envelope. No stamp. No name. Her handwriting, a bit uneven, the way it always was when she wrote by hand. I didn't pull it out right away. First I just looked at it. As if I already knew that inside was something that shouldn't be seen. Then I opened it. And started reading. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. I didn't know it would be this hard. You were never supposed to become a father in such a lie. But you're part of it now. And I ask. Not another word. For him. The handwriting flowed confidently without corrections. As if she had reread it many times in her head before writing it down. I read it without breathing. For him. Not for us. Not for the child. Not for the husband. Him. You. Father. Lie. Each word like a nail. I didn't know who the letter was for. I only knew one thing. It wasn't me. The letter wasn't an explanation. Not a confession. It was a deal. An agreement. A pause torn from someone else's dialogue. Who is he? Jake? The one she called father? Or maybe me? The word father in her letter didn't sound like a title. It sounded like a sentence. I read it again. And I understood. She had already chosen. She had already told him, or nearly. They had their own stage. Their own fear. Their own lie. And what was left for me was just a roll. Without lines. I folded the letter back. Very carefully. As if I were afraid to tear the fabric of a lie that had already wrapped itself around me. And in that moment I realized. I was an extra in a play that had started without me. And all I had left was to figure out how it would end. And for whom? I went to get tested. Not to catch her in something. But to understand whom had I betrayed. Myself? Or her? The lab smelled like alcohol, plastic, and something dry. Like paper that had waited too long in a folder. I sat on a hard chair, holding a plastic cup, and felt something inside me shrink. It wasn't suspicion. And not verification. It was a question to myself. Who am I now? I thought I was afraid of the truth. But it turned out I was afraid of being unnecessary. Afraid of being expendable in a life I thought was mine. The nurse said, all done. The result will be ready in a few days. I nodded, signed, left. On the way home, I don't remember a single turn. 3 days. Ordinary. Sarah made soup, laughed on the phone, scribbled something in her notebook. I looked at her. Like a stage prop that hadn't yet realized the play had already collapsed. On the 3rd day, the letter came. A sealed envelope. Thin like a shard of glass. I didn't open it right away. I sat in the car. The same one that once carried the scent of her shampoo. Foreign and familiar. Everything repeats. I opened the result. 3 lines. Cold. Precise. Sperm count. 0/milliliter. Functional activity. Absent. Diagnosis. Irreversible infertility. I read it 3 times. 0. Not a chance. Not. Temporarily reduced. 0. I placed the paper on the seat, started the engine, then turned it off immediately, as if I was going to run, and then changed my mind. I stared ahead, at the dashboard, the keys, the air. Then I laughed, quietly, strangely, inappropriately. The laughter wasn't from absurdity. It was from the realization. She knew, before I did. Maybe by the doctor's expression. Maybe by the letter that arrived before mine. or by his eyes. She knew, and chose not to tell me. She left me living in delusion, trying, hoping, planning a future I was never truly part of. I used to think betrayal was someone else's skin. Turns out, it's silence. I didn't scream, didn't accuse. I just asked, is he my brother? She was placing a cup on the table when I asked. No build-up, no warning. She froze. The cup stayed in the air, trembling slightly in her hand. But her fingers were steady. She didn't step back, didn't gasp, didn't explain. She simply set the cup down. Saturday, and looked at me, silently, for a long time. Then one nod, almost imperceptible, but enough. Everything got quieter, even inside, as if the world heard it too and went still. There was no panic in her eyes, no fear, only weight, the kind that makes your shoulders collapse but you can't set it down. I wanted a child, she said. Her voice was steady. Yours. Do you understand? I nodded. But I couldn't, I said. I know, she replied, without emotion. Not because she was cold, but because everything had already burned out long ago. And between us, where lies had once lived, another silence appeared. The silence of powerlessness. I didn't ask how many times. Didn't ask when it started. Didn't want to know if it happened on his birthday. Or mine. It no longer mattered. She looked at me like you look at someone who'd already been buried and somehow returned. Alive. And unnecessary. And inside me only one thing kept burning. Why didn't she trust me with that decision? Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she choose us? She took away the choice and called it fate. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt. It was that she decided I couldn't handle the truth. And maybe she was right. We live in the same apartment. I can hear him move inside her. But I don't feel that he's mine. She cooks porridges. Oatmeal with pear, rice with almonds. Reads books. Aloud. About how organs form when hearing begins, when a baby first responds to light. She hangs tiny socks on a string. White with blue stripes. She smooths them gently as if they're already a person. And I sit beside her. And stay silent. Because between us there are too many words. And none of them saved us. Sometimes I touch her belly. Not out of love. Out of guilt. As if a touch could fix what was broken by silence. He kicks more often now. Especially in the evenings when she lies on her left side. I hear her pause, smile, place her hand there. Sometimes she places mine. And I hold my palm there. Hear the heartbeat inside. But I don't feel it's mine. Sometimes I think he knows. That I'm a stranger. That my blood doesn't call to him. I hate Jake. But damn it. I understand him. He loved her. I saw it long before that first look that lasted longer than it should have. I just chose not to see. She doesn't ask for forgiveness. She doesn't justify herself. She just lives as if this is still our life. Just without the us. And I don't ask for forgetting. I don't say, let's start over. We both know there's no such thing as starting over. Sometimes when she's asleep, I take the stethoscope. Place it on her belly. Listen. A small heart. Beating. Fast, rhythmic, alive. And every time I think, will I be able to love him? Not as an idea. Not as a son. But as a person. Knowing whose DNA is in him. And I don't answer myself. I stayed. Not because I forgave. But because he looks at me as if I'm all he has. He's 2 months old. With a wrinkled brow, warm little hands, and an expression like he knows something we don't. When I hold him, he frowns, searches for a breast, wraps his tiny fingers around mine. And falls asleep. Without fear. Without doubt. He doesn't ask questions. Doesn't search for resemblance. He just chooses me. I don't know whose he is. No, I do. But every day I pretend I don't remember. Sometimes I almost believe it. Almost. Jake disappeared. Left. Didn't write a word. And that's good. Because I don't know what I'd do if I saw him. Sarah has become quieter. Softer. Not the woman I fell in love with. And not the one who betrayed me. As if something inside her has burned out. And now only ash remains on which she carefully cradles the child. We barely speak. But sometimes she touches my hand when I hold the baby. Not like a wife. Like a person afraid to be alone. I haven't forgiven. And probably never will. But I stayed. I change diapers. Get up at night when he cries. Rock him even though I can't sing. I just whisper something that sounds like life. And he looks at me. As if he doesn't know there could be any other way. As if I'm the only thing he has. And maybe for the first time through all of this, I feel needed. Not as a husband. Not as a man. But simply as the one who stayed. When everyone else left.